Alright, so I recently finished playing through Guilty Gear Strive. Funny enough, one of the reasons that I started playing through it now is because I thought support was kind of winding down. It felt like it had been a while since the last season pass was announced, and, the characters had been out a little while, hadn't really heard much, figured they were probably working on the next one, only for them, towards the end of my playthrough, to announce 2.0 and another season pass. So I guess that's just my luck, but this isn't my first experience with the series. Several years ago, I was just picking up, I think. I wanted to try some different fighting games, and I think one of the things I did was I looked at all the series that had been at EVO and got the ones that I didn't have, and Guilty Gear was one of them. I got XX Accent Core plus R. I had to write that down on the side with the, massive subtitle. And I remember I had fun. I did a run of arcade mode, or tried to. I remember I got my ass handed to me by Slayer. I don't even think I wound up defeating him. And I did just some other regular matches. I remember Faust was sort of the standout, fun-seeming character to me from that. But yeah, it was fun, but it didn't really stand out that much in a sense compared to other 2D sprite fighters. But then Strive kind of came along, and I know it's probably been said 1,000 times, but just sort of what they did with the visual presentation and having these, really cool animations that sort of, as seamlessly as they can, are sort of implemented in the gameplay, primarily with super attacks and match intros and outros. But it just sort of helped it stand out, and I'll admit I thought there would have been a little more of it in the gameplay itself. Not to say, obviously, the sprites look great, the animations are smooth, but, pun half intended. I think it's something to strive for in the future, to, get the gameplay as much in that other style as they can, I guess. Something that kind of surprised me was the game I thought, after, playing a bit, to compare it the most to was actually probably my favorite non-Smash fighting game, being Soul Calibur. Granted, it's in 2D, it has a much different tone, kind of going with I don't know, what do you call it, steampunk rock? I don't know. But, compared to the medieval fantasy of Soul Calibur, then obviously being in 2D, and also there's no ring outs. Instead, it does a Dead or Alive-esque thing where you sort of push your opponent to another part of the stage, which overall, I prefer 3D fighters and I prefer ring outs, but this was the next best thing. And once again, I just really like the focus on weapons, especially when, so many of them focus on martial arts. I think overall it's a little more unique, and I just prefer it a little more with the weaponry focus. Something else that surprised me a bit with this game was its story mode. I was expecting what many fighting games have pretty much done the last many entries, where they just sort of, have some cutscenes, set up a fight, and rinse and repeat until the end. This game's story mode is pretty much a straight-up anime. To be fair, I thought it was kind of a mid-anime. Maybe I'm not giving the beginning and the end of it as much credit as they deserve. It was pretty interesting and fun to see how they introduce everything and wrap things up. But in the middle, I don't know, I just wasn't as entertained as I would have hoped for. But hey, credit where it's due. I like how they kind of did their own thing with it. I guess past games, I don't know if there was fights in between, but they may have been outright just sort of like a visual novel, so I feel like moving that up to an animation here just feels like a natural progression. A minor detail that I know other fighting games have, but here it was kind of more front and center and maybe a little more relevant since it's the first time I really dived into the series, was just on the character select screen, where one of the first things that pops up, at least from my perspective, was character difficulty and type, so you know a little bit of what to expect going in, especially if it's all new for you. I liked it. I think it did a pretty good job setting those expectations. I will say I play from more a casual perspective, so maybe it was more of the competitive side that affected this. But I did feel like a couple 4 out of 5 difficulty characters were a little easier than I was expecting. Gold Lewis was one in particular. The only thing I could think of with it, though, was I don't remember him having a lot of special attacks, so maybe that's more where they're coming from, where if you're more competitive and you don't have as many options to work with. But to sort of get a hang of, all the options you have wasn't that difficult for him, at least for me. Probably the most difficult to get used to were characters without traditional dashes. I remember Bedman in particular giving me a bit of a hard time. I think most of them were 4 or 5 out of 5 difficulty. So it at least matched up. Although Potakamin, or however you pronounce it, I think he may have been 3 out of 5. Although even with that, Chaos was probably my worst character overall, though. And I wasn't, doing that bad, sort of getting a hang of some of the Zoner. Most of them were 5 out of 5 difficulty characters, but for him, I don't know, I guess that was just that one step too far for me to get a hold of. On a minor note that kind of doesn't involve the game itself, but something I did for the first time is I got a second monitor and I pulled up combos on the second monitor. And it's not as good as I think it was Dead or Alive 5 that allowed you to have the training mode-esque combos displayed that'll adapt as you have your inputs, and it'll tell you what combos you still have available to use. But this was the next best thing, and a lot better than pausing the menu to just be able to sort of learn on the fly in the heat of actual gameplay as opposed to training mode. So I'm definitely going to be trying to do that more whenever I play a fighting game in the future. And I kind of get, not having that for competitive or online, but like I said, I'm just playing casually. So one other thing I will say, if you're going to play the game, either wait a while until it's all pretty cheap or play it right away. Because if you're like me, and you were interested in playing it, but then you got distracted, and then, you want all the fighters, and you're keeping up on season passes. Even to get everything right now, the base game and all the characters, it's $90. I think, though, keeping up on a couple season passes like I did, it easily went over $100. Which, if you're really into it, it makes sense, but honestly, like I said, I'm more casual, so it does feel like a bit much. I'm not particularly eager to get more into 2.0 anytime soon. I will admit, I'm also not, too eager to go back and, maybe do XXX and Core Plus R or Xrd even. I feel like, I got my fix of the series here and would sort of just rather, play this one if I wanted to play more. There's only, a couple characters that are sort of locked to some of the older ones now anyway. Obviously, that's subjective, though, if you, get more into it than I did or, are looking at it from more of a competitive lens. That can vary. But, yeah, still happy and would recommend anyone if you're, a little interested to check out this series, this entry in particular. It's pretty fun.